She paid for an elderly man's gas, never imagining he owned the company. The next day, "Another day," she muttered to herself, blowing warm air into her hands as she walked to her station at Pump 3. Working as a gas station attendant wasn't what she had dreamed of at 18. When she dropped out of community college in her second semester to care for her mother, diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Now, at 32, with a 10-year-old daughter and bills piling up, the gas pumps had become her familiar territory for the past 5 years. The strong smell of gasoline no longer bothered her senses. In fact, almost nothing surprised her about the monotonous job, the hurried drivers, the rare tips, the endless hours on her feet. Helen had developed an almost automatic routine, preserving her emotions for what really mattered: Julia, her daughter, and Mom. She was about to fill up a delivery van when she noticed an old car park awkwardly near Pump 2. The vehicle, a beat-up Ford Taurus from the 80s, looked as tired as its driver, an elderly man with white hair and trembling hands who moved with visible difficulty. "Miss, please." The old man's voice wavered as Helen approached, noticing his distress. "I need some help." Something in the man's gaze jolted her out of her usual daze. His eyes, a faded blue with age, overflowed with palpable anxiety. "Are you okay, sir?" Helen asked, approaching with genuine concern. "Mary's in the hospital," he explained, his breath ragged with anguish. "My wife, 52 years together. She had a stroke last night and they called me now saying she woke up asking for me." The man rummaged frantically through his pockets, his face paling with sudden realization. "Oh God, I left without my wallet. No money, no ID, nothing." Helen felt her heart clench at the sight of tears welling up in the old man's eyes. The town was small, but the hospital was almost 25 miles away, on the other side of the county line. "How much gas do you need, sir?" she asked, already reaching for the pump. "Fill it up, please. I'll go back and get my wallet and—" "No need," Helen interrupted, starting to pump the gas. "You'll have time to get to the hospital and back home afterwards." The old man looked confused. "But miss, I can't." 52 years with the same person is rare these days." Helen smiled as the numbers ran on the pump display. "Mary needs you now, not worries about gas." When she finished filling the tank, the total came to $32.50. Without hesitating, Helen pulled her own wallet from her jacket pocket, took out a 20 and a 15, and registered the payment. "But that's your money," the man protested, visibly moved. "It's just gas," she replied, handing him the receipt. "Go see your wife." The old man held her hands for a moment, his teary eyes conveying more gratitude than words could express. "How can I repay you?" "Tell Mary to get better soon," Helen replied simply. As she watched the blue car drive away, Helen felt a strange warmth in her chest, despite the biting morning chill. It was as if she had done something more than just fill up a car. At that moment, she had no idea that this gesture would change her life forever. Fired. "But that doesn't make any sense." Helen felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet as she stared at Mark, the operations manager, a man with a perpetually impassive expression and eyes that never met those of his subordinates. "The rules are clear, Helen," he replied, adjusting his rectangular glasses with a methodical gesture she knew well after so many years. "Employees cannot use their own funds to pay for customer fill-ups. It's a violation of the Code of Conduct, Section 4, Paragraph 12. "I helped an elderly man in distress," she protested, her voice echoing louder than she intended in the small office. "His wife was in the hospital." "And I'm sorry about that," Mark retorted with no apparent emotion. "But it could have been a scam, a ruse to get free gas. We have procedures." Helen wanted to scream that it was impossible to fake that kind of despair, that there was something genuine in those tired blue eyes. But the words died in her throat. Instead, she felt the weight of the consequences of her decision crushing her chest. "I have a daughter to support," she murmured, more to herself than to Mark. "My mother needs expensive medication." For a fleeting instant, something resembling compassion crossed the manager's eyes, but it quickly disappeared. "You'll receive all your entitlements. Your termination papers will be ready on Monday. The drive home that afternoon was the longest Helen had ever taken. Each step was like walking through quicksand as her mind calculated and recalculated bills, deadlines, possibilities. The severance pay wouldn't last long. Jobs were scarce in that small town, especially for a woman with some college and no specific qualifications. Upon arriving home, she was greeted by a tight hug from Julia, her 10-year-old daughter, whose dark eyes sparkled with the innocence that Helen fought daily to protect. "Mom, guess what? I got an A+ on my science test," Julia bounced, showing a paper full of gold stars. With a superhuman effort, Helen smiled, swallowing the lump that formed in her throat. "That's wonderful, honey. I knew you could do it. The teacher said I could be a scientist one day, that I have natural aptitude," the girl continued, pronouncing the last words carefully, as if they were a newly discovered magic formula. That night, after Julia fell asleep hugging her old teddy bear, Helen allowed herself to collapse at the kitchen table. Her mother, Mom, watched her with that keen perception that the illness had not diminished. "What happened?" the older woman asked, her hands marked by time holding Helen's with surprising firmness. When Helen finished telling the story, she expected to see worry in her mother's eyes. Instead, she found a spark of pride. "You did the right thing," Mom stated without a shadow of a doubt. "And the right thing is never easy, but it always finds its way back to us." When she opened the door, she was greeted by a man of about 50, wearing a well-tailored suit that contrasted sharply with the simplicity of the neighborhood. "Ms. Helen Mendonça?" he asked, with a formality that instantly made her wary. "Yes, that's me. My name is Richard Almeida," he introduced himself, extending a sleek business card. "I'd like to talk to you about an opportunity that I believe would be of interest to you." The card indicated that Richard was a CEO of the Alcantara gas station chain, the same group that had fired her the day before. Helen frowned, confused. "If this is about my termination," she began, "I've already been informed that—" "It's not about your termination," Richard interrupted, with an enigmatic smile. "It's about what happened before that. May I come in? I have something important to tell you about the gentleman you helped yesterday." Helen hesitated for a moment, but something in the man's serene expression made her step aside, allowing him in. She didn't know it, but she was about to hear something that would completely transform her understanding of recent events and her own potential. "Mr. Albert isn't just a regular customer," Richard explained, sitting at the small kitchen table where a steaming cup of coffee softened the tension of the moment. "He's my uncle, and one of the founders of the Alcantara chain." Helen almost dropped her cup. "What?" Richard smiled at her surprise. "For the past 6 months, we've been facing serious problems in several units, especially yours. Embezzlement, rigged pumps, falsified reports. We began to suspect an internal network of corruption." Helen blinked several times, trying to process the information. She remembered the whispers that stopped when she approached, the exclusive meetings for selected personnel, and the strange discrepancies in inventory that she occasionally noticed. "Instead of simply firing everyone and rehiring," Richard continued, "my uncle suggested something different. He wanted to find honest people within the current system, people who could lead a transformation." "And that's why he pretended to forget his wallet?" Helen asked, beginning to connect the dots. Richard shook his head. "Not exactly. His wife, my Aunt Mary, really did have a stroke, but in his rush to get to the hospital, he forgot his wallet. What happened was genuine." He paused, taking a sip of coffee. "What wasn't a coincidence was me watching the security cameras at that moment. We saw everything. You using your own money, even knowing the rules. And then we saw Mark fire you for it." Helen felt a mixture of indignation and confusion. "So you let me get fired, even though you knew I was just helping someone?" "We needed to see how the current structure would react." And it reacted exactly as we suspected, punishing integrity and empathy. Silence hung between them for a few seconds before Richard continued. "Helen, I'm here to offer you the management position at the station." The words seemed so absurd that Helen almost laughed. "Me, a manager, but I'm just a gas station attendant. I have no management training, no management experience." "You have something more valuable," Richard replied with a seriousness that made her pay attention. "Integrity and the courage to do what's right, even when it costs you personally. But I have a young daughter. My mother needs care. The salary will be 3 times your current one, with flexible hours and a comprehensive health plan for your family," Richard explained calmly, as if he were commenting on the weather. "In addition, we offer tuition assistance for your daughter." Helen felt her heart race. This would solve practically all her immediate financial problems. But there was still something bothering her. Why me? Why not bring someone in from the outside with experience? Richard leaned forward, his eyes reflecting an unwavering determination. "Because we're tired of experts without character. We prefer people of character who can become experts." From the other room, Mom's voice called for Helen, momentarily breaking the intensity of the conversation. She excused herself and went to attend to her mother. When she returned, she found Richard looking at a photo on the wall. Helen, Julia, and Mom on a rare beach day 3 years earlier. "Family is important to you," he observed. It wasn't a question. "It's everything to me," Helen replied sincerely. "Then you understand why we're doing this. The Alcantara chain started as a family business, built on values of trust and service. We want to recover that essence." Helen sat down again, feeling the weight of the decision she had to make. It was an unimaginable opportunity, but also a huge risk. Would she be able to face the challenges of a leadership position? How would her former colleagues react? What if she failed? As if reading her thoughts, Richard added, "You won't be alone. You'll have my direct support and all the guidance you need." In the background, Helen could hear Julia humming as she helped her grandmother. She thought of the nights her daughter slept, dreaming of possibilities that seemed so distant from the reality in which they lived. She thought of her mother's medical bills, the expensive medications, the treatments that always had to be postponed. "When do I start?" she asked finally, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Richard's smile lit up with genuine satisfaction. "Monday, 8 a.m. Come a little early to meet the new support team." As he got up to leave, Helen felt a mixture of excitement and terror. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing she needed to jump, but unsure if her wings would sustain her flight. "Mr. Richard," she called when he was already at the door. "Why the integrity test? Why not simply review the security footage or investigate the finances?" He stopped, turning with a thoughtful expression. "Because numbers can be manipulated, Helen, but the moment someone has to choose between following rules or following their conscience, that moment reveals who the person really is." As she watched the executive car drive away, Helen felt a growing determination replacing her initial fear. It wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. What she didn't yet know was that the real battle was just beginning. The corporate uniform felt foreign against her skin. The lightweight fabric of the navy blazer, the starched white shirt, the gold name tag with the inscription Helen Mendonça, Operations Manager. It felt like a disguise, as if she were about to perform in a play she hadn't rehearsed for. It was 7:15 a.m. when Helen walked through the glass doors of the gas station, now no longer as an employee, but as a leader. The place was still quiet, with only a few employees from the night shift finishing up their work. Everyone stopped to watch her, expressions ranging from curiosity, surprise, and, on some faces, barely disguised disapproval. "Good morning," she greeted, trying to keep her voice steady. One of the attendants, Denise, approached with a hesitant smile. "Helen, is it really true? You're the new manager?" Before she could answer, the back door opened and Mark emerged, his leather briefcase under his arm, and his expression more closed off than usual. "Ms. Mendonça," he said, his formal tone laced with subtle irony. "I see you're here early, eager on your first day." "I wanted to meet the night shift team," Helen replied, maintaining her composure. "After all, I'm responsible for all the employees now." Something flashed in Mark's eyes. Frustration? Envy? It was hard to define. "If you'll allow me," he said, gesturing toward the office, "we need to discuss the transition." The meeting was tense, with Mark explaining procedures and handing over stacks and stacks of documents that Helen would need to review. The amount of information was overwhelming, but she refused to show any insecurity. "And here are the system passwords," he concluded, sliding an envelope toward her. "By the way, your meteoric rise is quite unusual." Helen met his gaze. "Sometimes, doing the right thing at the right time changes everything." "Or knowing the right people," Mark retorted, standing up. "Anyway, good luck. You'll need it." After he left, Helen allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, taking several deep breaths to calm her racing heart. The clock read 8:30 a.m. Soon, the day shift employees would arrive, including many who until days ago had been her colleagues. The door opened again, and Helen expected to see another familiar face. Instead, a young woman of about 25 entered carrying a laptop. "Ms. Mendonça, I'm Cristina Alves, administrative assistant assigned by Mr. Richard." The relief was instant. "Cristina, please call me Helen." The young woman smiled, placing her equipment on the desk. "Richard mentioned that you would need support in the early days. I'm here to help with systems, processes, and any documentation." In the following minutes, Cristina proved not only competent, but perceptive, guiding Helen through the complex management systems with a patience that betrayed experience in training. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Helen asked as they navigated the financial system. Cristina hesitated for a moment. "Yes. Richard assigned me to assist in the transition of 3 other units in recent months. So there are other people like me, other integrity tests." "Exactly," Cristina confirmed. "And if you'll allow me to be frank, you're facing the most challenging environment. This unit has significant problems." At 9:30 a.m., the morning meeting with the full team was the real test. Helen entered the break room, where 15 employees were waiting, some visibly uncomfortable, others openly hostile. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "Many of you know me as a colleague. Today, I'm here in a new role, but with the same values I've always had." She noticed Carlos, the longest-serving gas station attendant, crossing his arms with a skeptical expression. Next to him, Patricia from the convenience store whispered something to Teresa, both with sneering smiles. "I know this change is unexpected," she continued, determined. "Some may think I don't deserve to be here or that I don't have the ability to lead." The silence that followed confirmed her suspicions, and it's fair to think that way. "I don't have the traditional experience of a manager, but I have something to offer that I believe is equally valuable. Respect for each of you and a commitment to the integrity of this place." She paused, observing the reactions. Some gazes softened, others remained impassive. "In the coming days, I'll be talking to each of you individually. I want to hear your concerns, suggestions, and ideas. My door will always be open." Denise, the attendant who had greeted her earlier, timidly raised her hand. "What happened to the new security cameras that were requested for the parking lot? We've had 2 thefts in the past month." It was a simple question, but Helen perceived the implicit test. Without resorting to Cristina, she replied, "I'll review all pending requests today. Security is non-negotiable, both for our customers and for you." The rest of the meeting flowed with less tension, and when it was over, Helen noticed that 2 distinct groups were forming. Most seemed to adopt a wait-and-see attitude, but a small core, led by Carlos, exchanged glances that communicated something beyond distrust, something close to active concern. Back in the office, Christina had already organized the priority documents. "How did it go?" she asked. "Complicated," Helen admitted, "but not unexpected. I think most are willing to give it a chance, but there's a resistant group." "Natural," Christina agreed, handing her a red folder. "These are the latest financial audits. Richard suggested you start here." Opening the folder, Helen immediately understood why. The numbers simply didn't add up. Subtle differences between actual and recorded inventory, discrepancies in daily deposits, inexplicable adjustments in obscure categories. Is this what I think it is?" she asked, feeling a chill down her spine. Christina nodded gravely. "That's why you're here, Helen. Someone is embezzling money, probably more than one person, and it didn't start recently." As she studied the documents, Helen felt the weight of the responsibility she had assumed. It wasn't just about leading a team or proving her worth, it was about unraveling a network of corruption that seemed deeply rooted in the structure of the unit. The phone rang, startling her. It was Richard. "How's the first day going?" he asked, his voice conveying a confidence that Helen wished she felt. "I'm starting to understand the scope of the challenge," she replied, looking at the documents scattered across the desk. "Remember, Helen, you were chosen not only for what you did, but for what we saw in you. We trust in your ability to make a difference." Hanging up, Helen stared at her reflection in the darkened computer screen. The woman staring back at her looked different from the gas station attendant of days ago, more determined, less resigned. "Let's get to work," she said to Christina, pulling up the first set of reports. "Where do we start to unravel this?" Julia had noticed the change. "You're different, Mom," she commented one night, while Helen scribbled numbers in a notebook at the kitchen table. "Different how, honey?" she asked, raising her tired eyes to look at her daughter. "More strong," the girl replied after searching for the right word, "like the heroines in the stories we read." That innocent observation strengthened Helen in the days that followed, especially when faced with resistance at work. And there was plenty of it. The unit had divided into 3 distinct groups: the allies, led by Denise, and some younger attendants; the neutrals, who simply wanted to do their jobs without complications; and the antagonists, a hard core of approximately 5 veteran employees who seemed determined to sabotage her. Carlos, in particular, had become a constant challenge. Every new initiative of Helen's was met with public questioning and veiled objections. "That'll never work," was his favorite phrase, always said loud enough for others to hear. On that Monday morning, Helen called a meeting to present adjustments to the work schedules. "The new distribution better balances the shifts and reduces overload," she explained, distributing the new schedules. "Everyone will have their 2 consecutive days off, as you requested." "And who's going to cover the peak hours?" Carlos interrupted, crossing his arms. "We always need extra staff on Friday nights, and these new schedules leave the team short-handed precisely during those times." Helen had been expecting the objection. "If you look at the second page, you'll see that we've implemented a bonus system for those who volunteer for those periods. It's only fair to compensate the extra effort." The answer caught Carlos off guard, but he quickly recovered. "And where's that money coming from? Are you cutting it from another area?" "From the gains obtained with the reorganization of the inventory and the renegotiation with suppliers," Helen replied, maintaining her calm. "In addition, we've reduced emergency maintenance calls by 40%, simply by following the correct preventative procedures." The silence that followed was her first small victory. Even the most resistant couldn't deny that the initial changes were already showing positive results. After the meeting, Denise approached timidly. "Helen, can I talk to you in private?" In the office, the young attendant seemed nervous, constantly looking at the door as if she feared being surprised. "What's wrong, Denise?" "It's about Carlos and his group," she began, hesitant. They have meetings after hours, when they think no one's watching. In the storage room office. Helen felt a chill run down her spine. How did you find out about this? I forgot my purse last week and went back to get it. I saw lights in the storage room and heard voices. I didn't want to interrupt, so I peeked through the side window. Denise paused, swallowing hard. They were checking documents, and I heard Carlos saying that they needed to speed things up before she finds out. She, being me, I presume, Helen murmured, connecting the information with the financial discrepancies she had been investigating. I think so, and there's more. The week before last, I saw Carlos handing an envelope to a man I'd never seen before in the back parking lot. Helen thanked her for the information, promising discretion. When Denise left, she immediately called Christina. We need to install additional cameras in the storage room and the back parking lot, she said without preamble, without anyone knowing. I can arrange that for tomorrow night, Christina replied. Any news on the investigations? Maybe. I'm following the money trail, but I need more concrete evidence before confronting anyone. After hanging up, Helen opened the file where she kept her personal notes. The financial discrepancies followed a pattern, small deviations in various categories, creating a considerable sum at the end of each month. It was too sophisticated to be the work of a single gas station attendant or cashier. Her cell phone vibrated with a message from Richard. How are things going? Can we have dinner tonight to discuss the progress? Helen hesitated. The last few weeks had been so intense that she had barely had time to process the growing closeness with Richard. What had started as a strictly professional relationship had gradually acquired more personal nuances. He showed genuine interest not only in her work, but in her life, asking about Julia and Mom, offering help when needed. Helen couldn't deny that there was something magnetic about his personality, a mixture of strength and gentleness that intrigued her. Dinner at 8 p.m. at Tony's Italian Bistro, she replied, deciding that the conversation would be strictly professional. In the afternoon, while reviewing sales reports, Helen noticed a shadow pass by her door. She looked up in time to see Teresa from the convenience store walking away hurriedly. It was the third time that week that she had caught employees watching her furtively. Her phone rang again. It was Julia. "Mom, there's a black car parked in front of the house," the girl said, her voice slightly trembling. "It's been there for half an hour. Grandma told me to call you." Helen felt her blood run cold. "Did anyone get out of the car?" "No. It's just parked there with the engine running. Lock all the doors and don't open them for anyone. I'm coming home now." When she arrived 15 minutes later, the car had already left, but on the mailbox she found a brown envelope with no sender. Inside, just a newspaper clipping with a news story about a car accident and a handwritten note. "Accidents happen to those who meddle where they don't belong." Helen stared at the paper, feeling a mixture of fear and fury growing in her chest. It was no longer just about corruption and embezzlement. Now it involved her family. The line had been crossed. The restaurant was nearly empty when Helen arrived, 15 minutes late and still trembling slightly. She had left Julia and Mom at her aunt's house, a safer place while she assessed the situation. Richard stood up immediately when he saw her, his smile giving way to a concerned expression when he noticed her face. "What happened?" he asked, pulling out her chair. Helen placed the envelope on the table, briefly recounting the events of the afternoon. She carefully observed Richard's reaction, the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darkened. "This is unacceptable," he declared, his voice controlled but filled with contained fury. "I'll arrange security for your house immediately." "Richard," Helen interrupted, leaning forward, "I need to understand exactly what's going on. Not just the current embezzlements, but the complete history. I feel like I'm facing something much bigger than I initially imagined." He hesitated, running a hand through his graying hair in a gesture she already recognized as a sign of discomfort. "You're right," he finally agreed. There's more at stake than just the skimming at your station. The waiter approached to take their orders, but Richard requested only 2 waters. I think we need a more private place for this conversation. 20 minutes later, they were in Richard's office at the Alcantara chain's central administrative building. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city, now punctuated by thousands of lights that twinkled in the darkness. It all started about 3 years ago, Richard explained, pouring her a cup of tea. My father had recently passed away, and my uncle Albert was partially retired due to health problems. The executive board took on more operational control. Helen nodded, vaguely remembering the changes in leadership that had occurred at the time. Fernando Meireles, the then chief financial officer, implemented a new management system that ostensibly was more efficient. The initial results seemed promising: increased revenue, reduced costs. Richard paused, sipping his own tea. But my sister Luciana, who worked in the legal department, began to notice inconsistencies. He walked to a file cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. She found evidence of a complex scheme: rigging gas pumps, falsifying inventory reports, laundering money through shell suppliers. It was sophisticated and involved multiple hierarchical levels. And what happened when she discovered it? Helen asked, already anticipating that the answer wouldn't be positive. She came to me first, presenting her suspicions and partial evidence. We agreed that she should gather more proof before taking the case to the board. His voice faltered slightly. It was my biggest mistake. Richard opened the folder, showing a photo of a middle-aged woman with the same intense eyes as his. A week later, Luciana suffered a car accident. She survived, but with permanent neurological damage. Today, she lives in a specialized clinic with the cognitive capacity of a 7-year-old child. Helen felt a lump in her throat. You don't think it was an accident? I'm sure of it. The brakes were tampered with. The forensics confirmed it. But we couldn't prove who did it, and the case was closed as mechanical failure. He slammed the folder shut. In the same week, all the documents Luciana had collected mysteriously disappeared from the legal department. And Fernando Meireles left the company 6 months later, claiming opportunities more aligned with his career goals. Today, he's a consultant for various retail chains, including gas stations. Helen processed the information, feeling the pieces fall into place. So, the skimming at my station is part of a larger system that was never completely dismantled, Richard confirmed. When Fernando left, we thought his replacement, Rogerio Campos, would clean house. Instead, we suspect he just refined the scheme, making it less visible. And the integrity tests? The other units you mentioned? Richard nodded. Part of a broader strategy. My Uncle Albert and I decided to rebuild the chain from the bottom up, finding honest people for key positions and collecting enough evidence to finally expose the entire operation. Helen absorbed that revelation, feeling the weight of the responsibility grow exponentially. It wasn't just about saving her job or proving her worth. It was about justice for Luciana and safety for her own family. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? We wanted to protect you, to allow you to establish your position without the weight of this knowledge. He hesitated. But now that they've threatened your family, the rules have changed. Helen felt a cold determination replacing the fear. What do we do now? We accelerate the plan. The cameras that Christina will install will give us more evidence, but we need to be extremely careful. If they suspect we know too much. He left the sentence unfinished, but the warning was clear. As Helen got up to leave, Richard held her hand briefly. I'm so sorry for involving you in this, Helen. If you want to back out, we'll find another way. She thought of Julia, of Mom, of her quiet life before. It would be so simple to say yes, to walk away from this danger. But then she remembered the photo of Luciana, of her life destroyed for doing what was right. No, she replied firmly. We're going all the way. On the way to her aunt's house, where she would spend the night with her daughter and mother, Helen reflected on how drastically her life had changed in so little time. The gas station attendant who just followed orders was now at the center of a corporate conspiracy, facing threats and developing complex feelings for her boss. And the most surprising thing, in the midst of fear and uncertainty, she felt more alive than ever. "Mom, why have we been at Aunt Susan's house for 3 days?" Julia's question hung in the air as they both prepared breakfast. Helen hesitated, searching for suitable words for a 10-year-old. "We're doing some renovations at home," she replied finally, avoiding her daughter's inquisitive gaze. "But I haven't seen any construction workers or building materials," Julia insisted, perceptive as always. "And you keep looking out the window every 5 minutes like you're expecting something bad." Helen sighed, putting the frying pan aside. How to explain to a child that her own mother was involved in a dangerous investigation, that powerful people might be watching them? "I'm facing some problems at work," she said, opting for a simplified version of the truth. "People who aren't happy with the changes I'm making." Bad people? The one who's going to fix everything. That unwavering confidence from her daughter was both comforting and terrifying. How could she possibly live up to such high expectations? Her cell phone vibrated, a message from Christina. "Cameras installed. We captured something interesting on the first night. I need to show you in person." 2 hours later, Helen found herself back in Richard's office, accompanied by Christina, who was operating a laptop. "The thermal cameras capture movement even with the lights off," the assistant explained, opening a video file. "We installed 3. One in the storage room, another in the back parking lot, and the third in the administrative hallway." The recording from the storage room showed 3 figures moving in the darkness, recognizable by their thermal silhouettes. Helen immediately identified Carlos by his stature and characteristic posture. "This is Augusto from the purchasing department," she pointed out, indicating the second figure. "And this appears to be Rogerio Campos." Richard leaned in for a closer look. "Yes, it's Rogerio, the chief financial officer personally involved in a clandestine nighttime meeting. This is significant." In the video, the 3 were talking intensely, consulting documents they had removed from a hidden safe behind a bookcase, something whose existence Helen was completely unaware of. "Did we get audio?" she asked. Christina shook her head. "Unfortunately not, but we have this." She advanced to another recording, this time from the parking lot. It showed Rogerio handing a folder to Carlos, who examined it briefly before nodding. "The date on the file is last night," Helen observed, "which means they're continuing to operate normally, despite our investigations. In fact, they seem to be speeding up operations," Richard corrected, pointing to the intensity of the conversation, which indicates that they're worried about something or someone. Helen felt a chill. "Do you think they know we're investigating?" "Not specifically, but Rogerio has certainly noticed the changes in the units where we've placed new managers. That would explain the threat to your family, a warning to back off." The meeting continued for another hour as they developed strategies to collect more concrete evidence. They needed physical documents, bank records, anything that undeniably connected Rogerio to the scheme. "The safe in the storage room," Helen suggested. "If we can get access, maybe we'll find what we need." "Too risky," Richard objected. "If you're caught tampering with it." "I can create a distraction," Christina interjected. "A surprise health inspection of the convenience store. That would keep everyone busy for at least 2 hours." Helen considered the proposal. It was risky, yes, but also her best chance. "When?" "Tomorrow," Richard decided. "Christina will coordinate the inspection, and I'll be nearby in case something goes wrong." Leaving the office, Helen felt the weight of the decision she had made. She was about to cross a line, from passive investigator to active agent, risking not only her job, but potentially her freedom and safety. The next day, as planned, the inspection created the necessary chaos. While everyone was focused on the convenience store, Helen slipped silently into the storage room. Her heart was beating so loudly that it seemed to echo off the walls. Locating the safe behind the bookcase was relatively simple, thanks to the recordings. Opening it, however, was another challenge. They had considered several possibilities, from breaking it open to using sophisticated equipment, but in the end, they opted for the simplest solution, trying obvious combinations. Company founding date, Helen murmured to herself, trying the numeric sequence. Nothing. Rogerio's birthday. Also unsuccessful. After a few more frustrated attempts, she remembered something Christina had mentioned casually about Carlos, his obsession with old phone numbers. The number of the first station, she ventured, typing in the sequence. To her surprise, the safe opened with a soft click. Inside, she found exactly what she was looking for. Folders organized by date, containing detailed records of embezzlement, names of shell suppliers, offshore accounts, and, most importantly, Rogerio's signatures authorizing each operation. Helen quickly photographed each page with her cell phone, trying to control the tremor in her hands. She was so focused that she almost didn't hear the footsteps approaching. Almost. She quickly closed the safe and pushed the bookcase back into its original position, hiding behind a stack of boxes. The storage room door opened and Carlos's voice filled the room. "I need to check something quickly and then I'll be back to help with the inspection." Helen held her breath, feeling each second drag on painfully. Carlos moved through the storage room, grabbed some documents from a folder and left, without checking the safe. When she finally managed to escape the storage room, Helen felt like a fugitive in her own unit. Christina was waiting in the car, 2 blocks away. "Did you get it?" she asked anxiously. In response, Helen showed her the hundreds of photos on her cell phone. "We have everything: names, dates, amounts, signatures. Let's go to a safe place to transfer this," Christina suggested, speeding away. "We can't risk losing this evidence." As they drove away, Helen felt a turbulent mixture of emotions: relief at having obtained the evidence, fear of the consequences, and a strange sense of power. She held in her hands the ability to bring down a criminal scheme that had lasted for years. But something bothered her, a persistent question that echoed in her mind. How had Carlos and Rogerio managed to operate for so long without being discovered? Who else could be involved? And more importantly, how far would they have to go to protect their secrets? The answer to those questions would come sooner than she expected, and in a way that would test not only her courage, but also her faith in the people she had learned to trust. "I still don't understand why we can't take this evidence directly to the police," Helen argued, examining the files organized meticulously on Richard's desk. It was late at night, and they had been working for hours, analyzing the evidence collected from the safe. The extent of the scheme was even greater than they had imagined. More than $3 million embezzled in the last 3 years, distributed through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. "Rogerio has powerful connections," Richard explained for the 3rd time, rubbing his tired eyes. "If we act rashly, he could destroy crucial evidence or, worse, disappear before we can get justice for Luciana." Helen nodded, understanding the argument, but still uncomfortable. Every day that passed meant another day of risk for her family, who remained at Aunt Susan's house, protected by a private security guard hired by Richard. "But now we have concrete evidence," she insisted. "Documents with signatures, bank transfers, everything." Richard stood up, walking to the window of his office. The city slept under a blanket of diffused lights, oblivious to the drama unfolding. "We need a confession," he said finally. "Something so irrefutable that not even his connections can save him. And more importantly, we need to ensure that everyone involved is exposed, not just Rogerio." "A trap, then," Helen concluded. "Lure him into a situation where he admits everything." "Exactly, and I have an idea how to do it." The next morning, the plan was in motion. Christina had strategically leaked the information that Helen had found compromising documents and planned to present them to the Alcantara chain's administrative board next Monday. That will force him to act, Richard explained. He'll try to retrieve or destroy the alleged evidence before the meeting. And I'm offering the perfect target, Helen completed, feeling a chill in her stomach. But what if he decides to adopt more drastic measures, like he did with your sister? We won't let it get to that point, Richard assured her, holding her hands firmly. We'll have security, cameras, recorders. He won't know it, but every move will be recorded. The following days were a torturous wait. Helen returned to her normal routine at the station, acting as if nothing had changed, while noticing different looks from Carlos and his group. She knew she was being watched, analyzed, that her every word was reported. On Thursday, the bait finally worked. Helen received a direct call from Rogerio Campos. Ms. Mendonça, his voice was smooth, almost paternal. I've been following your work with interest. I'd like to discuss some opportunities for your career. Can we have dinner tomorrow? The restaurant chosen was elegant and discreet, the type of establishment where private conversations remained that way. Helen arrived purposefully 10 minutes early, allowing the technical team hired by Richard to check the environment and install additional microphones. When Rogerio arrived, exuding confidence and expensive cologne, Helen was already prepared. The tiny microphone in her blouse worked perfectly, transmitting to Richard and two ex-cops who were waiting in a car in the parking lot. Helen, may I call you that? Rogerio began after the initial orders. I confess that your trajectory has impressed me. From gas station attendant to manager in such a short time, it demonstrates a special talent. I just did my job, she replied, keeping her expression neutral. And that's exactly why I want to discuss your future, he continued, leaning in slightly. Talents like yours shouldn't be limited to a single unit. I'm considering a significant promotion, regional supervisor perhaps. Helen raised her eyebrows, feigning surprise. That would be unexpected, considering my limited experience. Sometimes what we value isn't experience, but discretion. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The ability to be a team player, you understand? I believe I do. Helen took a sip of water, buying time. Would that have something to do with the documents I found in the storage room? The change was instantaneous. The smile froze. The eyes hardened. What specific documents? The ones that were in the safe behind the bookcase. Records of payments, shell companies, fuel skimming. Helen kept her voice calm, as if discussing the menu. Particularly interesting those with your signature authorizing transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. For a moment, Helen thought she had gone too far. Rogerio paled, then regained his composure with a visible effort. I see you're direct, he commented, his voice now colder. So let's get straight to the point. How much? How much what? How much do you want for the documents? To forget you saw them? 100 grand? 200? Helen felt a mixture of revulsion and relief. Revulsion at the proposal, relief at getting exactly what they needed. I'm not interested in money, she replied slowly. Rogerio laughed, a humorless sound. Everyone's interested in money, Helen. Only the amount varies. Name your price. I want to know the truth, she said, staring directly at him. About Luciana Almeida, her accident. It was like hitting a nerve. Rogerio was completely still, studying her with renewed intensity. Richard put you up to this, didn't he? He asked finally. All this time, he was using you. The truth, Mr. Campos. Was it you who ordered the sabotage on Luciana's car? A heavy silence hung between them, while Rogerio seemed to calculate his options. Finally, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. Not directly. I hired third parties, professionals. She was digging too deep, finding connections that could destroy everything we've built. Helen felt her stomach churn, but maintained an impassive expression. And who are we? Who else is involved? More important is who isn't involved. Rogerio replied with a sardonic smile. Your precious Richard, for example, so noble, so upright, and so convenient. What do you mean? Richard knew everything from the beginning. He approved the first operations when he took over as commercial director. It was after we grew that he decided to redeem himself and feign innocence. Helen felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I don't believe you. You don't have to. Just ask him about the Safe Margin project of 2020. Ask about the meetings in Asunción, Paraguay. Watch his reaction. Helen's mind was spinning, trying to separate truths from manipulations. Was it possible? Richard, the man who had entrusted his safety and that of his family, could have been involved from the beginning. The documents, Helen, Rogerio insisted, bringing her back to the present moment. Where are they now? In a safe place. And if anything happens to me or my family, they'll be immediately sent to the authorities. Rogerio studied her for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly towards the door. Helen noticed out of the corner of her eye Carlos and Teresa entering the restaurant discreetly. Rogerio has powerful connections, Richard explained for the third time, rubbing his tired eyes. If we act rashly, he could destroy crucial evidence or worse, disappear before we can get justice for Luciana. Helen nodded, understanding the argument, but still uncomfortable. Every day that passed meant another day of risk for her family, who remained at Aunt Susan's house, protected by a private security guard hired by Richard. But now we have concrete evidence, she insisted, documents with signatures, bank transfers, everything. Richard stood up, walking to the window of his office. The city slept under a blanket of diffused lights, oblivious to the drama unfolding. We need a confession, he said finally. Something so irrefutable that not even his connections can save him. And more importantly, we need to ensure that everyone involved is exposed, not just Rogerio. A trap, then, Helen concluded. Lure him into a situation where he admits everything. Exactly, and I have an idea how to do it. The next morning, the plan was in motion. Christina had strategically leaked the information that Helen had found compromising documents and planned to present them to the Alcantara chain's administrative board next Monday. That will force him to act, Richard explained. He'll try to retrieve or destroy the alleged evidence before the meeting. And I'm offering the perfect target, Helen completed, feeling a chill in her stomach. But what if he decides to adopt more drastic measures, like he did with your sister? We won't let it get to that point, Richard assured her, holding her hands firmly. We'll have security, cameras, recorders. He won't know it, but every move will be recorded. The following days were a torturous wait. Helen returned to her normal routine at the station, acting as if nothing had changed, while noticing different looks from Carlos and his group. She knew she was being watched, analyzed, that her every word was reported. On Thursday, the bait finally worked. Helen received a direct call from Rogerio Campos. Ms. Mendonça, his voice was smooth, almost paternal. I've been following your work with interest. I'd like to discuss some opportunities for your career. Can we have dinner tomorrow? The restaurant chosen was elegant and discreet, the type of establishment where private conversations remain that way. Helen arrived purposefully 10 minutes early, allowing the technical team hired by Richard to check the environment and install additional microphones. When Rogerio arrived, exuding confidence and expensive cologne, Helen was already prepared. The tiny microphone in her blouse worked perfectly, transmitting to Richard and two ex-cops who were waiting in a car in the parking lot. Helen, may I call you that? Rogerio began after the initial orders. I confess that your trajectory has impressed me. From gas station attendant to manager in such a short time, it demonstrates a special talent. I just did my job, she replied, keeping her expression neutral. And that's exactly why I want to discuss your future, he continued, leaning in slightly. Talents like yours shouldn't be limited to a single unit. I'm considering a significant promotion, regional supervisor perhaps. Helen raised her eyebrows, feigning surprise. That would be unexpected, considering my limited experience. Sometimes what we value isn't experience, but discretion. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The ability to be a team player, you understand? I believe I do. Helen took a sip of water, buying time. Would that have something to do with the documents I found in the storage room? The change was instantaneous. The smile froze. The eyes hardened. What specific documents? The ones that were in the safe behind the bookcase, records of payments, shell companies, fuel skimming. Helen kept her voice calm, as if discussing the menu. Particularly interesting, those with your signature authorizing transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. For a moment, Helen thought she had gone too far. Rogerio paled, then regained his composure with a visible effort. I see you're direct, he commented, his voice now colder. So, let's get straight to the point. How much? How much what? How much do you want for the documents? To forget you saw them? 100 grand? 200? Helen felt a mixture of revulsion and relief. Revulsion at the proposal, relief at getting exactly what they needed. I'm not interested in money, she replied slowly. Rogerio laughed, a humorless sound. Everyone's interested in money, Helen. Only the amount varies. Name your price. I want to know the truth, she said, staring directly at him, about Luciana Almeida, her accident. It was like hitting a nerve. Rogerio was completely still, studying her with renewed intensity. Richard put you up to this, didn't he? He asked finally. All this time, he was using you. The truth, Mr. Campos? Was it you who ordered the sabotage on Luciana's car? A heavy silence hung between them, while Rogerio seemed to calculate his options. Finally, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. Not directly. I hired third parties, professionals. She was digging too deep, finding connections that could destroy everything we've built. Helen felt her stomach churn, but maintained an impassive expression. And who are we? Who else is involved? More important is who isn't involved, Rogerio replied with a sardonic smile. Your precious Richard, for example. So noble, so upright, and so convenient. What do you mean? Richard knew everything from the beginning. He approved the first operations when he took over as commercial director. It was after we grew that he decided to redeem himself and feign innocence. Helen felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I don't believe you. You don't have to. Just ask him about the Safe Margin project of 2020. Ask about the meetings in Asunción, Paraguay. Watch his reaction. Helen's mind was spinning, trying to separate truths from manipulations. Was it possible? Richard, the man who had entrusted his safety and that of his family, could have been involved from the beginning. The documents, Helen, Rogerio insisted, bringing her back to the present moment. Where are they now? In a safe place. And if anything happens to me or my family, they'll be immediately sent to the authorities. Rogerio studied her for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly towards the door. Helen noticed, out of the corner of her eye, Carlos and Teresa entering the restaurant discreetly. You really appreciate your family, don't you? Rogerio commented casually. Especially your daughter. Julia, right? Bright girl. Excellent grades in science, from what I hear. Helen's blood ran cold. The message was crystal clear. Don't you dare threaten my daughter, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Not a threat, just an observation. Children are the future, aren't they? They deserve every opportunity. It would be tragic if something interfered with their potential. At that moment, something inside Helen broke and recomposed itself in a new, stronger way. Fear gave way to an icy, calculating fury. This conversation is over, she declared, rising abruptly. Your days are numbered, Rogerio. Richard Almeida isn't the only one with interesting recordings. The look of shock on Rogerio's face was priceless. Helen walked away quickly, aware of Carlos and Teresa tracking her movements. In the parking lot, Richard was waiting for her inside the car, the tension visible on his face. Did you get it? he asked as soon as she got in. Yes, he confessed everything. The sabotage on Luciana's car, the embezzlements, everything. Helen took a deep breath before adding, and he also said some things about you. The sudden stiffening of Richard's shoulders confirmed her suspicions even before he answered. What exactly? Project Safe Margin, meetings in Asunción. Helen watched his reaction carefully. He implied that you were involved from the beginning. A heavy silence filled the car as Richard stared at the windshield. Finally, he sighed deeply. I knew this would come up eventually. He started the engine, but not here. Let's go to a safe place. The 20-minute drive was made in complete silence. Helen alternated between watching the road and studying Richard's tense profile. They arrived at a simple house on the outskirts of town, apparently a safe house he maintained for emergency situations. I was involved at the beginning, Richard admitted as soon as they entered, even before Helen could sit down. Not in the skimming or the corruption, but I knew something irregular was happening and I didn't do enough to stop it. Why? Helen's question contained all the disappointment and confusion she felt. Because Fernando Mireles had information that could destroy my Uncle Albert. Old problems from when the company was starting out. Nothing criminal, but compromising enough to ruin his reputation. Richard ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that Helen now recognized as a sign of his deep discomfort. The Safe Margin project started as a legitimate initiative to optimize operations, but Fernando gradually turned it into his facade for embezzlements. And the meetings in Paraguay? They happened. I went to 2 of them, before I fully understood what was at stake. When I realized the extent of the scheme, I backed away, but he hesitated. I didn't report it. I didn't do anything other than distance myself silently. Helen absorbed the confession, feeling a mixture of disappointment and relief. Disappointment at the omission, relief at not being an active accomplice. And when Luciana found out, that's when I finally decided we needed to act. But I was a coward, Helen. The pain in his voice was palpable. I asked her to gather more evidence instead of going to the authorities immediately. I thought we needed an incontestable case. That delay cost her everything. Helen approached, seeing no longer the powerful executive, but a man devastated by guilt. That's why you're so determined now, she concluded. It's not just corporate justice, it's personal redemption. Richard nodded slowly. I can't undo what happened to Luciana, but I can ensure that those responsible pay, and that the company returns to the values that my uncle always defended. Why did you trust me? Helen asked, the question that had bothered her from the beginning. Why choose me for something so crucial? Because I saw in you something I lost a long time ago, the courage to do the right thing without calculating personal consequences. He held her hands gently. That simple gesture, paying for the gas for a desperate old man, showed an instinctive integrity. And that's exactly what we needed. A beep interrupted the moment. Richard's phone. It's the security guards, he informed after checking the message. Carlos and Teresa left the restaurant and are trying to track our car. We need to move. Where to? Is the recording enough to incriminate Rogerio? Yes, but we need to protect it and you until tomorrow. I have an emergency meeting with the board at 8 a.m. With the recorded confession and the documents we collected, we can finalize this at once. As they prepared to leave, Helen thought of Julia and Mom, still at her aunt's house. She needed to ensure they were safe until everything was over. We have to get my family first, she insisted. I won't leave them vulnerable while Rogerio is still on the loose. Richard agreed, and soon they were on their way to Aunt Susan's house. What Helen didn't know was that the night still held one last surprise, a confrontation that would definitively change the course of their lives. The gate of Aunt Susan's house was ajar when they arrived, sending a chill of apprehension down Helen's spine. She knew her aunt would never leave the gate like that, especially with the recent concerns. Something's wrong, she murmured, trying to contain the growing panic. Richard immediately signaled for them to wait, contacting the security guards he had positioned in the vicinity. The response came quickly. They had been called to check a supposed intruder in the back of the property, only to discover it was a false alarm. When they returned, the house seemed normal with the lights on. Classic distraction tactic, Richard concluded, his expression hardening. Call your aunt. Now. Helen dialed with trembling fingers. After 3 agonizing rings, she heard the familiar voice of Aunt Susan. Helen, where are you? There's a man here saying you sent him to pick up Julia and your mother. Helen's world seemed to freeze. I didn't send anyone, Aunt Susan. Who is it? A man named Carlos. He showed a badge from the company where you work. He said you'd been in an accident and asked him to bring Julia and Mom to you. Don't let him take my daughter. We're coming now. We're in front of the house. Helen hung up and ran to the gate, ignoring Richard's calls to wait. When she entered the garden, she saw the front door open and Carlos come out, firmly holding Julia's arm. Behind him, Teresa appeared leading Mom, who seemed confused. Let go of my daughter now! Helen's voice echoed across the silent property. Carlos froze momentarily, surprised by her arrival. Julia took advantage of the distraction to try to break free, but he tightened his grip on her arm, making the girl groan in pain. Don't complicate things, Helen, he warned. Rogerio just wants to talk to you, and your family is the incentive to ensure that conversation happens. Using a child as a shield. Is that the level you're at now, Carlos? Helen advanced slowly across the yard, every fiber of her being focused on her daughter. I thought you were just corrupt, not a monster. Something flickered in Carlos's eyes, a brief flash of shame, quickly replaced by cold determination. You don't understand how it works, Helen. It's not just about money. It's years of building a structure. Powerful people are involved. I'm perfectly aware of how it works, she retorted, continuing to approach cautiously. I saw the names in the documents. Politicians, businessmen, even judges. That's why you're so desperate. Teresa, who had remained quiet until then, suddenly pulled Mom closer, as if reinforcing her threat. Enough talk, she interrupted. Either you come with us now, or your daughter and your mother will suffer the consequences. It was at that moment that Richard emerged from the shadows, positioning himself strategically to block the exit through the gate. It's over, Carlos, he declared with authority. The police are on their way, and we have Rogerio's recorded confession about everything, including the sabotage that left my sister in a coma. Carlos's face paled visibly. He'd never admit that. But he did, confirmed Helen. Every detail, including the names of everyone involved. You, Teresa, Augusto. Rogerio didn't hesitate to throw you to the wolves to try to save his own skin. Teresa seemed momentarily shaken. He promised we'd be protected, that no one would find out. He lied, Richard replied simply, like he lied to everyone. The only question now is, do you want to be accomplices in a kidnapping in addition to the financial crimes? That would increase your sentences considerably. A moment of absolute tension hung in the air. Helen could feel Carlos's internal conflict, Teresa's indecision. Then, surprisingly, it was Julia who acted. You're not a bad person, the girl said, looking directly at Carlos. My mom always said that good people sometimes do bad things when they're scared. You're scared now, aren't you? The child's simple words seemed to strike Carlos like a physical blow. His grip on Julia's arm loosened, and she skillfully broke free, running into her mother's arms. I'm sorry, Carlos murmured, seeming suddenly much older and tired. I wouldn't hurt a child. I never wanted this. Teresa, seeing his resolution crumble, released Mom with a defeated sigh. It's really over, isn't it? Not completely, Helen replied, embracing Julia and her mother. You can still choose to cooperate. Tell everything you know. Help dismantle the whole scheme, not just the ends. The distant sound of sirens began to fill the night air. Carlos exchanged a meaningful look with Teresa, and they both seemed to reach the same silent conclusion. What do you need to know? He asked, sitting heavily on the porch step. The following hours were a whirlwind of testimonies. Police officers coming and going, investigators collecting evidence. Helen watched everything with a surreal sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie starring herself. Julia remained by her side, extraordinarily calm for a child who had just gone through such an experience. When Helen commented on this, the girl shrugged with a wisdom beyond her years. "I knew you'd come. You always fix everything." That unwavering confidence was both comforting and terrifying. Helen hugged her daughter tighter, silently promising never to put her at risk again. It was past 3 in the morning when the police officers finally withdrew, taking Carlos and Teresa to give formal statements. Richard remained, organizing additional security for Helen's family while the investigations continued. Rogerio was arrested trying to board a private flight to Uruguay, he informed, gratefully accepting the cup of coffee that Aunt Susan offered. "And the evidence we collected has already been sent to a trusted prosecutor. There's no turning back now." "And the company board?" Helen asked, thinking about the broader repercussions. "Emergency meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. My Uncle Albert will be present." Richard hesitated. "In fact, he specifically asked to meet you." Helen couldn't contain a tired smile. "The man who unintentionally changed my life." "Unintentionally?" Richard laughed softly. "Helen, he's been watching you for months. That day at the station wasn't a coincidence. He chose your unit specifically because he had heard about a gas station attendant who treated every customer as if they were the only one." The revelation caught Helen by surprise. "How so? Who talked about me?" "Customers. Other employees. Actually, it was one of the cashiers, Denise, who mentioned you to one of the regional managers during an inspection. She said you were the only person at the unit who seemed to really care." Helen felt a wave of emotion. To think that small acts of kindness, which she considered natural and insignificant, had been noticed and valued to the point of completely changing the course of her life. "Oh, what happens now?" she asked, looking out the window where the first signs of dawn were beginning to appear. Richard followed her gaze. Now we rebuild. The company, the trust, everything. And us?" The question escaped before she could contain it. He turned to face her, his eyes revealing an intensity that transcended the weariness. "That depends entirely on you, Helen. But I sincerely hope that it's just the beginning." The rising sun cast a golden light over the room, symbolically marking the end of a long night and the beginning of something completely new. Helen looked at Julia, asleep on the sofa, at her mother talking softly with Aunt Susan in the kitchen, and finally at Richard, the man who had entered her life as an enigma and now represented a possibility she had never imagined for herself. "A beginning," she repeated, allowing herself for the first time in a long time to glimpse a future full of possibilities. "I would like that." "A little," Helen admitted, unconsciously adjusting the blazer of her suit, much more elegant than the corporate uniform she had worn on her first day as a manager, but still with the same gold name tag, now updated to Helen Mendonça, Director of Social Responsibility. The last year and a half had been transformative in every aspect. After the scandal that rocked the Alcantara chain, widely reported as one of the largest corporate corruption schemes in the state, a complete restructuring was implemented. Albert Alcantara, at 78, temporarily reassumed control, with Richard as his right-hand man and Helen leading an unprecedented initiative to humanize the company and reconnect with the communities where they operated. "I remember the day you suggested we create this department," Richard commented, observing the guests who were beginning to arrive for the official opening of the Alcantara Empowerment Center, a space dedicated to training young people from underserved communities for the job market. "You said that companies needed to be more than just workplaces or service providers. And you listened to me," Helen replied, still surprised by how quickly her ideas were embraced and implemented. "Not all CEOs would do that," Richard smiled. That smile she now knew so well after months of working side by side, and for the last 8 months of a relationship that had evolved into something much more personal. "Not all CEOs have a Helen Mendonça to inspire them," he replied simply. Across the hall, Julia was excitedly showing a school friend the small science lab installed in the center, a special addition that Richard had made sure to include when he learned of the girl's interest in experiments. "She's blossoming," Helen commented, watching her daughter with pride. "The scholarship to the vocational school, the science projects. She seems like a different person from that shy girl before." "Inspired by her mother," Richard replied, following her gaze. "Children learn more by example than by words, and what an example she has." The guests continued to arrive. Representatives from City Hall, local business owners, journalists, and more importantly for Helen, the employees of the Alcantara chain. Many of them she had met personally during her visits to the units, implementing new policies, listening to concerns, building bridges where there had previously only been rigid hierarchies. Denise, the former attendant who first alerted her to the clandestine meetings, was now the manager of one of the units. Some other employees who had collaborated with the investigation also received promotions and recognition. As for Carlos and Teresa, both had negotiated agreements with the prosecutor's office in exchange for full cooperation, resulting in reduced sentences. "It's time," Richard reminded her gently, indicating the stage where Albert Alcantara was already positioned, leaning on his cane, but still emanating the aura of dignity that characterized him. Helen nodded, heading to the stage for the inaugural speech she had carefully prepared. As she walked, she couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey that had brought her there. From a gas station attendant struggling to pay the bills to an executive whose vision was actively shaping the future of an entire company. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice clear and confident, filling the hall through the microphone. "2 years ago, I was on the other side of the counter, literally. Filling cars, cleaning windshields, and occasionally, only occasionally," she smiled, provoking laughter from the audience, managing to convince someone to check the oil. She paused, locating Julia and Mom in the front row, both beaming with pride. "Back then, I couldn't imagine being here today. But I've learned that sometimes the smallest of gestures can trigger the greatest transformations." Her gaze met Albert Alcantara's, who nodded softly in acknowledgement. "This center represents more than just a corporate investment in social responsibility. It represents a new philosophy that companies do not exist in isolation from the communities they serve, that true success is measured not only in profits, but in the positive impact we generate." As she developed her speech, Helen realized how much she had grown not only professionally, but as a person. Insecurity gave way to confidence, fear to courage, resignation to purpose. "When we officially open this center, we will be opening more than just physical doors. We will be opening doors of opportunity, of hope, of transformation, because we believe that every human being deserves a chance to show their worth." Upon concluding, the applause was warm and genuine. Albert Alcantara joined her on stage for the symbolic ribbon cutting, leaning on her arm with a familiarity that still surprised her. The powerful patriarch who now treated her almost like a daughter. "You've changed this company for the better, my dear," he murmured as they posed for photos. "And Richard too, thanks to your influence." "We're just continuing the legacy that you started, sir," she replied sincerely. After the formalities, while the guests circulated through the new space, Helen found a moment of tranquility in a small garden in the back of the center. It was there that Richard found her, contemplating the movement through the window. "A penny for your thoughts," he offered, approaching. "I was thinking about the gas," she replied with a small smile. "Gas?" "Yes, $32.50 worth of gas that changed everything. The best money I ever spent, without a doubt." Richard laughed, wrapping his arm around her waist. "You know that Albert had that receipt framed? It's in the company memorial, along with the first gas pump they installed in 1952. Helen rested her head on his shoulder, allowing herself this rare moment of public relaxation. "And us? Where do we go from here?" she asked, not referring only to work. Richard turned to face her, his eyes reflecting a quiet certainty. "Wherever we want to go, Helen, the future is entirely in our hands." From the hall, the sound of Julia's animated voice caught both their attention. The girl was enthusiastically explaining the function of a microscope to a group of children from the social program, naturally assuming the role of mentor that she saw her mother perform daily. "She'll be quite the scientist one day," Richard commented affectionately. "Or whatever she chooses to be," Helen corrected softly. "The important thing is that now she knows she has choices, that she's not limited by circumstances, only inspired by them. The greatest transformations with the first gesture." And below, framed separately, a faded gas receipt for 30-50, dated 2 years ago, the unintentional catalyst for a change that continued to expand in ever-widening circles, touching countless lives beyond her own. On stage, scheduled as the closing activity, a young local artist was preparing to sing. Helen recognized the song as soon as the first chord sounded, a ballad about new beginnings and second chances that she used to listen to during her days as a gas station attendant, dreaming of possibilities that seemed unattainable. Now, those dreams had not only materialized, but expanded to dimensions she had never imagined. And as she watched the people around her, Julia, Mom, Richard, the employees, the young people from the social program, Helen understood the deepest truth of her journey. It wasn't just about professional advancement or corporate success, but about the transformative power of empathy. A simple act of kindness had triggered a chain reaction that would continue far beyond that moment, far beyond that room, affecting lives that she might never know personally. And in that lay her greatest victory. "You don't need to have power to change the world," she whispered to herself, repeating the words she now frequently used in her motivational talks. "You just need to have the courage to not stay silent." Richard squeezed her hand gently, as if he had heard her thoughts. And together they walked back to the celebration, not just of the center they were inaugurating, but of the extraordinary journey that an act of empathy had initiated. If this story touched you, subscribe for more heartwarming narratives. What would you do in the protagonist's place? Comment below.